Have you wondered what financial advisors actually think about finances? This is your sneak peek at the conversations within Financial Design Studio. Michelle Smallenberger, the CEO here, will be your host as you go behind the designs.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Behind the Designs podcast. My name is Michelle, and I'm a financial advisor here at Financial Design Studio, where we help professionals retire in a tax-efficient way. Today, we are kicking off something new, so we're going to do a case study mini-series. So over the next 4 episodes, we'll introduce to you fictional clients based on real-life situations, and you'll get to listen in as our team works through the kind of planning conversations that we have during our workday. So joining me for today's planning session is Rob Stoll. Welcome, Rob.
Hello. How you doing?
Good to have you here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. You get a peek behind the curtain of, how we actually do planning and what the thought process is.
Yes, exactly. So Rob's main role at Financial Design Studio is our CIO, our Chief Investment Officer. Rob's expertise really lies in portfolio management. He's the one who invests clients' money so that when you need it, it's there. And however, all 4 of us really work together with clients. And that's kind of what you're going to get a feel for today is while we each have a specific expertise or role, we also all work with every client. So you're really getting 4 advisors' perspectives on your plan and putting that together. Rob, I first want to kind of introduce you to today's fictional clients who are Nick and Noelle. No, that is no one's real name. So we're making all of this up. And what's really interesting, a lot of these qualities are very similar to a lot of our clients. So, a lot of people kind of come in with similar things, but their plan has something unique to them. And so that's why in each of these case studies that we're going to do, you're going to notice a little bit different. They might all be retiring executives, but there's something different they want to do or something unique to their plan that kind of gives us a little bit of a challenge to solve for financially, which makes it exciting for us because it's always different. But I think it'll help people to kind of understand how we think about it.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, because we work with a lot of executives, there's a lot of similarities in terms of what we're doing. So I imagine, any number of our clients will probably be listening and be like, oh, they're talking about us, when it's like we're talking about 20 different executive clients. So, it just so happens that their situation is very similar to others.
Yeah, I think that's what's great too, is we work with similar clients, and that's really beneficial to our clients because we know this client group and we know what the planning challenges are, the issues, and how to really coordinate everything together. So that is a testament to what we want to be doing. And so hopefully that is reassuring to clients who are already working with us, but also new clients who are listening and saying, hey, this is really helpful to understand how you think. So all right, so we're going to dig in. I'm going to kind of give you some facts about our fictional clients, and then we'll kind of from there kind of say, okay, how do we get started? What do we need to know? Things like that. All right, so first we're really working with Nick and Noelle, who are both executives. Retirement date is in the next 3 years, so it's upcoming. They're in their late 50s, early 60s. And really their main goal that they don't have something super specific. However, they do want to be able to travel. Traveling is something they haven't necessarily done a lot of because they've been executives. So they've been working, spending a lot of time working. But between travel and then also kids, grandkids, wanting to be able to spend time with them. So really just kind of a lot of living. We tell clients, we want them to be able to live more and give more. And so with them, really living is important. That's their main goal. So making sure that what they've saved can go towards that over their lifetime. Some concerns for them specifically are they've done a great job. So when they came to us, these were things they kind of mentioned. They've done a great job saving for retirement, but they aren't sure if they've saved enough or will it last through their retirement. They're not sure if the way they're invested is appropriate at this stage of life. And they've also had issues with having to pay taxes on investment gains, distributions, income, and want to make sure that that's all efficient so that their taxes are efficient. And then they also want to make sure they're managing health insurance in early retirement since they're going to be retiring kind of before that Medicare age 65 age. So managing that cost before Medicare starts. And then they do have, things like a pension and, questions of whether we should take a lump sum or an annuity, which one's the best option. So that's really kind of the details about them. And like I had mentioned, kind of what they care about is being able to travel, but also maybe in the future, giving. So that could be a part of their estate plan when they pass away, or do they start doing some things while they're alive, help fund college expenses for grandkids, things like that. So, when we see this client, that's everything we learn, And so from there, what's interesting, Rob, there's not a lot of detail. So this is a very high level. So where do we dig in? Kind of what is the first step, or what do you think of when you're first hearing all this information?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing you think, this is very typical. So, you just think about any professional working at a big company or an executive anywhere, really. And, you start your career and it's all about building your career, going up the ladder, things like that. But there is this interesting point in life. I kind of peg it right around age 50, where all of a sudden you realize that retirement is closer than the beginning of your career. And it's like, okay, we've done all the, maxing out 401ks and doing things like that. But, at some point we're going to retire. And I don't know if all that money we've saved is enough. I don't know if it's invested correctly. So, that's usually what people are coming in with. So where we like to start with people is what we call a financial organization, where we're pulling together all the facts of their life. We're looking at not only all their income, we're looking at any stock compensation they get, which can be variable and lumpy depending on how the stock does. We're looking at other programs they might have, like deferred compensation, something like that. And pensions, you mentioned pensions, they are still around. Not a lot of them are active anymore for new employees, but a lot of employees that we work with in their 50s and 60s still have them. So the first step is just data gathering and really looking at their whole picture. What we do here at Financial Design Studios, we actually build a mind map with all the different areas of their financial life. So their income, their investments, their insurance, their properties they own, estate planning. And we like to get that all on one piece of paper just so that people can see this is where you're at right now. And then, once they have a good vision of where they are today, that's where we start proceeding of how can we optimize and work towards the goals that you have.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things when we start with people is a lot of times people think you just jump right into the numbers, answer the questions. There's a lot of financial questions there, and we absolutely do. There's also, though, kind of this background or this context that we want to be sure that we have so that we're answering them for them and not just kind of giving this, yes, your money will last based on what 50 other people want to do. It's really specific to them. So I think you're exactly right. One of the cool things with that mind map is we don't actually put any numbers on it. It's very much structural of their finances. So for this example, we would be putting and showing them, here's really where your retirement assets, you have saved them into these types of accounts. Here's your, the tax efficiency. Here's the benefits you have. So insurance, estate planning. And the reason we kind of do that is because when they ask us questions, that's how our brains think. If someone says, do I have enough money? We're thinking, well, what do you have saved? What are you paying on taxes? Things like that. So it's a way that we can kind of help them see when they ask us a question, we're thinking about it from all the aspects of their financial life. And it's also just to say, okay, yes, you have all the important pieces in place. And then we can move to the numbers, because we also cover that in that meeting too. So we go through that mind map before we kind of are able to build that mind map, or kind of maybe talk through that process of how we can build it. There's a lot that they have to get to us. Just kind of mention that a little bit, or just read it.
Yeah. So it's when we're first working with a client, there is a data gathering process, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. For a lot of people, it's not the most exciting part of the financial planning process. It's gathering bank statements, investment statements, 401k summary plan documents, a lot of different information. But there's really two reasons why we request that. Number one, we want to know, or we want you to know what you have and what you have available. So going back to that mind map, but also once we kind of get all that information, the goal of planning is we're running long-term projections for people, and important. We want to be able to travel. We want to be able to spend X amount of dollars each year, and it really is when you're running long-term projections like that, you got to have good numbers, and we're very, very careful about making sure that we have really good inputs, because you'd be shocked if an input is wrong, or if a number isn't quite right, or it's a ballpark estimate versus something solid. Little changes like that, when you compound that over their plan over 20 or 30 years, that can make a huge difference in terms of the messaging we're giving a client, whether, yeah, you're in great shape or you're not in great shape. So it really is, that is, again, not the most exciting part of the planning process for a lot of people, but it is really the most critical, because it helps them just understand where they are, their net worth. But it also builds that foundation for the work that we do subsequently to build their projections and see what planning recommendations make most sense for them.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. So kind of in that first real meeting that we're having with them to talk through, here's the detail of everything. So, a client comes on board, we start gathering information, we start building things right away. So that mind map starts getting built. And then also, like you mentioned, the net worth statement. So those are really kind of those first two things we're covering with you, is saying, okay, Nick and Noelle, in this case, here's your mind map, the structure of everything you have, now your net worth statement. And this is kind of for us almost like a verification stage. We're saying, we've gone through all your statements, we've put it into our system, we've built your net worth statement. Here's how much money, if you were to sell everything you own and pay off everything you owe, at the end of the day, here's how much money you have. And what's really important about this step, I think, is that, people, a lot of times, people may forget about accounts they have. They may think, oh, no, I don't think I have that much, or I have more. And that's really, like you said, those projections are dependent on this starting information. So that's where we kind of use this as a verification to say, does this look right to you? And a lot of times we ask people, do you even look at this very often? Do you look at it in this way? And a lot of people will say no. So even that is really helpful for them to say, oh, I know where we're at, kind of different than how I'm used to looking at it.
Yeah. I chuckle a little bit just when you mention like accounts they forgot about and things like that. I cannot tell you how many times we go through these meetings and you're looking at a net worth statement or going through the mind map, and all of a sudden it dawns, oh, I have that old 401k from that job I had 15 years ago, or oh, we own some land, or we own a cabin up north in Wisconsin with a couple family members, things like that. There's always something that comes out. And, that's really why we do it, again, because we want to make sure we're thorough. We want to make sure we have all the information. So that's why that meeting is so great, because you learn so much, not only about the client, what they're looking for, but you also find out a lot about details that maybe they didn't realize when they were going through getting all the documents for you.
Yeah. And that's really why we kind of ask the questions we do, because we know that it's very easy to forget about things, and they can make a significant part in a plan. So yes, that's a great point. We actually see it quite a bit. We kind of talked about a lot of account values, things like that. Now we kind of start looking at, there's a lot of other information we need. So in that data gathering process, some of those things may be like your most recent pay stub, things like that. The other things we're looking at are kind of your current income or expenses. So these are some things, because executives do receive kind of that salary, but also that stock compensation piece. So those are important because everybody's different. Some people have restricted stock, some have stock options. In this example, they really had restricted stock that they, was a part of their plan. So why that's important is, there's specific tax implications. So for them, it was kind of restricted stock. Again, that can vary from year to year. And then their expenses were pieces that we needed to know too. So I'll let you kind of talk about income and expenses and anything specific to that when we're kind of thinking about, this case, but also clients.
Yeah. So all these different pieces have a certain degree of predictability to them. So you think about it for an executive, they generally all get W-2 salary and some sort of cash bonus. So for the most part, the salary is obviously very predictable. The cash bonus usually within a range. You can look back over a few years and say, okay, we can estimate about this much is coming in each year from your bonus. But when you get beyond those kind of hard, predictable numbers, stock equity compensation, stock options, RSUs. In the case of RSUs, we knew, or in this case, we knew there's value to them, but that value goes up and down each year, and you don't know how much stock they're gonna get granted from year to year, and you don't know what the stock price is gonna do. So that becomes a piece of their puzzle that is kind of there, but you don't necessarily build it into their day-to-day spending because you don't really know what that value is going to be. Or you look at deferred compensation. That's a piece where we're looking at that and we're maybe doing something with that today to help them save taxes, but they won't really see until retirement, and there's a lot of different ways they can get it. So when you kind of go through each of those pieces, there's what we're trying to get at is what is the base, I guess, day-to-day cash flow. So the salary, maybe some bonus, and then the expenses, which oftentimes is something that we have to spend a little bit more time with clients on because some people budget, most people don't budget, and particularly when you're higher income, you kind of make enough that you don't really have to think about budgeting too much anymore. So, that's usually an area because that when we're running long-term projections, the kind of the ongoing day-to-day discretionary living expense number is arguably the most important one, other than when are you going to retire? Because little changes with that, how much cash do you need year by year, will make a huge difference. So that's really, kind of very high level. It's what is that day-to-day cash flow looking like with income and expenses? And then beyond that, what are the other pieces that can help your plan? So whether it's stock options, deferred comp, a pension, something like that, where it's money, it's out there, but you might plan that a little bit differently since it's lumpy and unpredictable.
Yeah. Yeah. And for Nick and Noelle specifically, they really were good about tracking their expenses. There are some clients that really do not track them at all. And so we do have a pretty surefire way to back into expenses. I think that's something that's really interesting that, for someone who does not track expenses, what's interesting is these people realizing, yeah, that's what we spend, kind of giving it a number, saying this is what we're spending every year or every month. And it's not in a way where they think, oh, that's way too much. It's just kind of realizing, okay, that's what our expenses are. So it makes sense, maybe, with our income minus what we're saving, that, some people will say there's nothing left at the end of the day. And it would make sense when you put all the numbers together. So for them, really great at tracking their expenses. They have kind of this current income of salary, some bonuses, the stock they get. So those are the specific things for them.
Yeah. And I mean, that was, like you said, in this particular example, very, very good at tracking all these things. So that makes it a lot easier. So if you're an executive and you're listening to this and maybe you haven't really gotten to the point of, hey, we're thinking about retirement, maybe reaching out, I always highly suggest to anyone getting to that point, start tracking your expenses. It's not necessarily to budget and make sure you're not overspending or anything, but just to know what are we spending. Do that for 3 or 4 months, and a lot of people these days run all their expenses on a credit card to get rewards. It makes it a lot easier. Do that for a couple months and just kind of see, okay, outside of paying our mortgage and insurance, what are we actually spending on just day-to-day stuff, whether it's going out or groceries, gas, utilities, things like that.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. I agree. That is something we kind of say this will really become important in retirement if you aren't already tracking it or don't know, because, you have more free time. You want to spend more. That can happen in retirement too, if you haven't tracked it or aren't. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So that's really kind of a lot of the upfront kind of data gathering when we start working with a client. You say there's information we absolutely need to know to kind of start building your plan. So we kind of start building everything. We have this review meeting with you to say, okay, here's everything we see. Here's what we're seeing. A lot of times there's things on documents like a tax return or pieces like that that we notice. Here's some planning opportunities along the way too. So kind of in that fact checking, we're starting to now kind of develop this list of here might be some planning opportunities that we see as we've just kind of started going through pieces. I guess kind of with that list, kind of walk us through now that we have done kind of this organization stage, really where are we switching to and kind of what does that phase look like?
Yeah. At that point, what we're shifting towards optimization. We're looking at your whole picture and saying, okay, here's where you're at. Here's everything you've done. Here are some ways that we see that you could optimize your financial position. And what I mean by optimization is saving on taxes, so not paying more taxes than you need to, maybe being strategic with some of those lumpier income items where there's stock options or, deferred compensation, like having a specific purpose for those. But in the case of Nick and Noelle, they, like most executives actually that we work with, I mean, they're generally very, very, very good savers. They've been doing all the right things for a long time. It's just a matter of pulling it all together and then saying, okay, is this enough? And that's really in this stage when we're looking at optimizing, we're also running those projections to say, okay, you want to spend, call it $100,000 a year discretionary. You want to spend $20,000 a year on travel. You want to give 20 grand a year to your kids, something like that. We actually build all that in. Look at your savings, look at your investments and say, okay, based on our projections, will this actually last? And even if all the projections come back and it looks good, we still always look for ways to optimize. So that's really the key. And particularly as people are nearing retirement, there's very distinct things you do in those last working years, whether it's maybe putting more towards deferred compensation or saving a bit more than maybe they would just so that they have funds available when they do retire. And then there's the retirement phase where it's like, okay, we're not working, but there's unique strategies like Roth conversions that we might be looking at that point. And then even beyond that, then you get into kind of, full on retirement where we're really focused on income planning, Social Security, any pensions, deferred comp, things like that. So there's like, for an executive, there's really like 3 phases that we're looking at all at once. And they're all very distinct. And that's why for executives, it's really interesting and important to know that you generally have a lot of ways to save and kind of be able to do things in all these different scenarios. So that's really what we're looking at. Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to add kind of a couple factors that can affect their plan that we kind of covered in the data gathering stage with them that you kind of highlighted, those expenses when you're really breaking out. Some of those facts are important of not necessarily what you're spending today, but also what do you want to be spending, because that can look different from the today we're working. But in their case specifically, they said we want to travel. So travel, depending on what that looks like, we recently had an episode about credit cards and travel and whether that's fast travel where you're going somewhere for a week and you're going to see all the sites and you're going to stay in a hotel versus slow travel where you're going to spend, a month in somewhere and really enjoy the culture. That can affect the cost of what you're spending. And so for them, these were pieces really understanding that. Now, something for them in that kind of fact gathering stage too was, do you have family or is there family that's going to be dependent on you? For them, they still do have parents who are alive, but they don't believe that they will be financially dependent on them. They may need to care for them or, make sure that they're getting the care they need over their lifetime, but that's not something in their plan that they need, to make sure that we're building into their plan. So that was kind of another expense, as well as, sometimes they donate funds and sometimes they don't. So some years that's very large, sometimes it's not. So those are just a couple of other facts that as we start to think about their strategy, I wanted to be sure that we're adding in there because they can impact that strategy.
Yeah. And in the case of Nick and Noelle specifically, and again, this is a generalization of a lot of different clients we have that are very similar, but For example, they had a lot of savings in taxable investment accounts, but they were invested in such a way that they were getting a big tax bill each year because they were invested in certain funds that threw off very large capital gains every December. And they'd go to file their taxes, and it's like, oh, you owe $10,000 in capital gains tax that you didn't know about before. Another common thing for Nick and Noel, and in a lot of cases we see, is because executives are really good savers, they don't really know how much they've saved until they see it on paper. And then, one of the things we look at is, do you have enough liability insurance coverage? And in this case, for example, they had done such a great job of saving, but their umbrella liability coverage was well short of what their net worth was. So, just little things like that, as we're kind of getting past that organization stage and really looking at it, we're finding all these things. We go through all these different areas of investments and tax and insurance and estate, and we're saying, okay, where are they at, and where would we recommend they be? And we start basically just making a list, and that list of things to do is what we actually go over in the plan with them. It's like, here's where you're at, but here's some areas we see that you could be doing a little bit better or more efficient, and then you see the impact of that.
Yeah. I think another thing, specific to executives, but specific to Nick and Noel as well, is just kind of saving money. Like you mentioned, they're good savers. So whether that's investments, we also see a lot of times where, there will be money saved in just a savings account. And, that's earning a good interest rate, especially over the last several years. They've saved money. And what they're doing is they're trying to set aside enough so that if they say, I want to retire at age 50, for example, if our plan looks good, we want to pay off the rest of our mortgage. And so they could have 100, 200,000 kind of set aside in the savings account, earning a good interest rate. So like you mentioned, kind of with those, distributions on the investment side, we can also see that on the tax side where you have high interest, dividends, interest being earned, that's also affecting their tax return. And so that's where those are some opportunities where we're saying, okay, well, if it's just a matter of deciding, do we pay the mortgage off or not, so that we stop having, this high interest or this high, taxes due to these investment gains or the income. Those are some of the things that we're looking for too. And so that's not uncommon as well. So that's kind of, as we're looking through documents, that's what we're really looking for. Is there some way that we can avoid increasing your taxes by taking action or moving funds to a different place or being invested differently, like you were saying? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. And what can also happen when you do that is then you're shifting, you're still seeing gains in the investment growth, but you're not having to pay tax on it each year from the interest that's being paid. And so it's a difference of when you pay the taxes. This is the other, I think, big strategy piece as we're building plans all together, and each of us, our team member says, okay, so from a tax perspective, so really when we kind of create these plans, when we're in this phase, we've taken all the data, we've gathered it, we've reviewed that, confirmed it with our client. So with Nick and Noelle, we've had this meeting. Now the four of us are really saying, okay, we've put this information into our software, and we start to kind of see, first we kind of answer that question of, if they just keep doing what they're doing today, are they fine? And we really just kind of like to start there. We kind of call that a base case. But from there, the four of us are really looking for opportunities to say, how can we make this better? Or given their specific situation. So with them, travel's a really big part of this, how to fund that every year. So we're also looking at, okay, we're kind of some of those retirement years, 65, 67 and beyond. Okay, well, how do we fund that? So kind of talk us through like some of the strategies, some of the thinking or conversations we kind of tend to have, I guess, when we start looking at that piece beyond that base case.
Yeah. So this is where really looking at the goals that they have. So when do they want to retire, and what are some of the monetary goals? The when they want to retire is usually a pretty big one, because in the case of Nick and Noelle here, they were, call it late 50s, getting ready to retire in 3 years. And a lot of people don't think about it, but the issue of health insurance is so huge. And for most people who retire early, i.e. before age 65, Medicare doesn't kick in till age 65. So if you retire early, you have this gap. And the unfortunate aspect of our current healthcare system is health insurance is insanely expensive. I mean, for somebody in their 50s, husband, wife, we assume at least $20,000 a year of just health insurance that they have to pay. And, in a lot of cases, it's not as good as what they had at their employer. So, so that's where, looking at particularly people retiring a little bit early, it's really important to kind of talk through, okay, you have these goals to do all these things, but you also have this health insurance nut of $20,000 a year that you have to think about. On the positive side, a lot of times when you have early retirement as well, in the case of Nick and Noelle, is that gives you a number of years before they have several years before they're going to start actually taking Social Security. So in theory, they have this, what we call income gap years, where they're not working anymore. They're not getting Social Security. So if you just look at the income thrown off by their investments, they're basically in one of the lowest tax brackets. And, that's where we kind of come in and we're looking at ways, okay, you have a lot of 401k and pre-tax 401k balances. We can strategically look at converting some of those to Roth year after year in those income gap years. So you're filling these low tax buckets and not having to pay a lot of taxes on these pre-tax accounts when required minimum distributions start in your mid 70s. So that's really, we're kind of addressing not only the long term, do you have enough money to kind of do everything you want to do, but we really want to get people focused on the nuts and bolts of what are those first few years of retirement going to look like? Because, I mean, for executives, that is the scariest thing by far. When you're making, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year, and in the case of Nick and Noelle, both of them were doing that. When you go from making that much money to all of a sudden waking up that first Monday morning and you're not getting a paycheck anymore, that is a big emotional change, and a lot of people struggle with that. So, that's one of the things that as we're working through these people, their plan, we're really preparing them mentally for, okay, I mean, this day is coming. You're not going to have a paycheck at some point, but here are 5 different ways that we can help you make sure you have enough cash on hand, whether it's setting cash aside or maybe timing the deferred compensation so that you're getting that deferred comp over 5 years in equal amounts. So you still have something coming in. There's a lot of different kind of executive pay things like that, where we can be very strategic in helping ease you into retirement, where you're still getting some income, but not the wages and bonuses that you were getting before.
Yeah, and I think that's what's interesting, specific to kind of executives when they're retiring is, their salary does stop, so kind of that paycheck. But what's very interesting is there's usually some type of executive compensation that continues kind of, so those early years where we kind of want their income to really drop so that we can do, some planning, some Roth conversions to kind of fill up these lower buckets like Nick and Noelle. One of the things that can make that really tricky is that they might have stock that they're still receiving. They might have this deferred compensation you're talking about. They might have bonuses that are still paying out. And so it's really important that we're detailing the timing of what they're receiving. Another one, you kind of have talked a little bit about, but a pension, that's another one that can start once you retire, or it could start a little bit after, or, you take a lump sum and now you don't have to worry about that income because you've, rolled that over essentially to your IRA. And so now we can again choose when we take that. So it's those pieces that can really kind of bring in this complexity. And that's what we're really trying to decide is when should we take what? So which benefit should we use first, second, third? And so it's interesting because I think a lot of executives, some of them will ask, do we have enough saved? Others are asking or saying, we know we have enough saved, but we don't know how to spend it down. It was kind of, easy to save it and just let it grow. But it's very different now that we're switching to actually start spending that. What order should we do that?
Yeah. Yeah. And in the case of Nick and Noelle, I mean, the piece you mentioned about stock kind of continuing after retirement, I mean, that was a huge piece. They had restricted stock that, with a lot of companies, if you quit your job, you'll lose your restricted stock. Like they'll basically take it back. But if you retire on their terms, they'll let you kind of vest it out over the following 2 or 3 or 4 years, whatever their vesting schedule is. And, that could be pretty substantial in years 1, 2, 3 of retirement, where somebody is getting 6 figures worth of stock payouts or deferred comp or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it's, I think the job of a financial planner is like, we just put this puzzle together. We have all these different pieces and we want to make sure, this income piece lands here and this stock income piece lands here and Social Security lands over here. Like, it's really about just organizing and being strategic in when all that stuff is happening.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things just to remind people of is all of these things can change. And not that means, we've decided to change your plan and do something different. That can happen depending on, what's happening tax wise or things like that with legislation. Sometimes we do want to change the plan. So this is why you want to be watching it every year, all year, to make sure, well, should we be changing something mid-year? But also the company can change, from when you worked there 10 years ago or 3 years ago. Now, if you're past retirement, now they can say, well, that benefit that we did have, we don't have anymore. And so what we were planning on them spending maybe for healthcare has changed, and now they're having to fund more of it. That can change, but also the speed, or like you had said, the stock price of stock, those things can all change, and those can make material changes to a plan. And so that is why it is important, just to realize this is kind of the plan for today, and we want to be reviewing that every year to be making sure, okay, yes, we're taking care of what we need to, but also accounting for any changes that happen too. So
yeah, and they do happen. I just recalled with Nick and Noelle and some others that we might, in a plan, we might say, okay, year 1 of retirement, throw out a round number. We want you to convert 100,000 of your pre-tax 401k to a Roth IRA. But they have some stock and the stock goes up a lot. And all of a sudden, they have a lot more income in year 1 of retirement than we thought when we did the initial plan. Well, now it's like, you don't want to do 100,000 of Roth conversion. Otherwise, you're going to get pushed into an even higher tax bracket, which completely defeats the purpose of doing the conversion. So, as you say, I mean, it really does. It changes year from year. And, I think a lot of people don't realize just how much life changes. But as we kind of get, do the initial plan and kind of get people to a place where they're comfortable, where they're at, and what kind of the near term and medium term strategy is to get them prepared for retirement. Beyond that, we're doing, we plan updates for people on a regular basis. And, we see it time and time again where we thought these things a year ago, but we'll ask the same client a year later, what are you thinking? And it's like, oh, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to do this. And, just being able to dynamically update their plan as things change, whether they choose the change or they don't, if there's a job loss or an inheritance or whatever it is, things change. So, yeah. So the initial plan is really, when we're working with executives, it's really important to kind of say, this is kind of like version 1.0. We're giving you recommendations. We're showing you areas that you can optimize. We're giving you long-term projections, but, we're also conscious that these things have to get implemented. That's what we're here to help you do. So we don't just make the recommendations. We'll actually help you do them so that you're getting the most out of them. But then, on a go forward basis, as the client gets more comfortable with thinking about the future, then all of a sudden there's conversations that happen during the course of the year. It's like, hey, we told FDS we want to spend 20 a year on travel. Let's up that because we can. And, we always want to go to Italy for a month or whatever it is. So, things do change for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, specific with their plan, their plan did look good. They had the assets. So when we kind of talk about like building that in their strategy, it really became kind of, okay, as now that you've retired, we kind of set a retirement date within the next few years for both of them. And then it was, okay, once you're retired, you're still going to be receiving some of this other stock compensation. So that kind of took up the opportunity to maybe do some early Roth conversions. And so now we said, okay, but after that stock has been received now we could start to say, okay, let's do some Roth conversions. And then into, before they're kind of starting that Social Security or in those RMD ages, it's kind of, year by year seeing how much to do. So their plan really became kind of a, year by year, but also here's kind of the general plan. Here's what it looks like. What's really neat when we're in this stage is we can say your base case looks like this if you change nothing. So if you just retire, receive the compensation that's remaining, start spending your assets, and you just wait until, your RMD age and Social Security age, and you just start taking your RMDs out over that time frame, we can see kind of what is a projected tax bill for that. But now we can say, well, if we do these other things and we kind of spread it out based on this timeline, here's the projected tax bill. And, in a lot of cases, especially with, large retirement assets, income like this is where there's a really significant difference in the amount of taxes that people are paying over their life. So in this stage of kind of strategy, we're able to say, by doing this, you're able to save this much. If taxes, happen like we plan for them to, if this is, based on these assumptions. And so it just starts to give them an idea. It's not ever guaranteeing here's what you're going to save, but it is really giving them a very broad overview of, tax wise, there is meaningful savings here to be had by structuring it and having a timeline over the rest of your life to do these things rather than just kind of letting life happen and doing things based on the trigger stages of when I have to do this. And so I think that's a really big, benefit in that strategy phase that we're able to say, okay, wow, there's some really meaningful things they can do to change kind of the projection of their plan.
Yeah. And we say this to clients all the time. When we're making recommendations to optimize your plan, the net result of that is that, as we run projections, we would project if you do these things, you will end up with more money at age, whatever it is, 90 or 100, whatever we run projections to, like over the course of your lifetime. Our goal is not just to build this pot of gold. I think our hearts and, the hearts of a lot of clients we work with is really, we want to help create a meaningful life for you. So, going into retirement is a big deal because you might be in retirement for 25, 30 years. And it's like, if you live to age 90, that's a third of your life right there. And, I think in the past, the way retirement has been sold to American consumers is you kind of, work as hard as you can and then you retire and you go to the beach and that's it. And, there is an aspect of that. It's like we've worked really hard. We haven't had a chance to travel. Let's go out and do that. I mean, by all means, 100%. But we also find with a lot of clients, and in the case of Nick and Noelle even as well, particularly, there's that thought process of like, well, what are we really doing in these years that, kind of can live beyond us a little bit. So maybe that is, giving some money to their kids or funding a college savings account for grandkids, like things they can do today that those recommendations that we make to, maybe save $200,000 over your lifetime on taxes, that money can be put towards the grandkids' 529 college savings accounts or maybe some charities. And so that's really the heart and goal in all of this. Is not just to just build this huge, this huge pile of money. The old saying is, once you die, you can't take it with you. That's really our philosophy as well. We want you to optimize things with a purpose of really, allowing you and helping you do something significant with that. So as you kind of live out those last years of your life, you're like, okay, we really made an impact that's going to last beyond when we're no longer around.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And it's very true. And this is why we say every person's goal is so different. And so we want to make sure that your plan is unique to you. So that's kind of, I guess, for us, kind of that fun stage of strategy. What are the financial planning strategies that you can take opportunities of, take advantage of to use in your plan so that we're creating more, that you can create more life with? So as we then, we've kind of finished this strategy phase, this is where, now we kind of break it apart. So we say your plan looks good. We're doing projections, the planning of those opportunities. One of the other big pieces we kind of focus on then is kind of each area of your finances. And this is where each of us kind of drills into. So specifically, Rob, you look at investments, Trevor will look at insurance, Steve will look at tax, I'll look at estate planning. And we really kind of give you a deep dive. So for clients, we're saying, okay, we've looked at all of your insurance, home, auto, life, health, whatever that is, investments, the type of accounts you have, the type of investments you have, tax, here's, the last 2 tax returns, maybe there was an amendment that needed made. And so from here for Nick and Noelle, we said, okay, what are the things specifically in these areas that you also, these are recommendations that we're making too. So we've got this big projection. So financially, so that your money will be there when you need it. But now we break it into these categories as well. And so this becomes kind of our, first look, our first step of saying, here's all the recommendations for your plan for each of these areas. And then it moves into implementing this. So on a year by year basis, basically everything we've just done just now continues. And we said, okay, now this is what we're going to keep doing for you all year, every year. And so as we're implementing this, kind of talk us through maybe specific to Nick and Noelle, what were the things in these categories and these items for them that we kind of identified as some recommendations, some things that we really needed them to kind of take care of that maybe they hadn't, or again, kind of some opportunities that we saw?
Yeah. Probably the first thing in their case was they had a lot of investment accounts, and this happens a lot, and it's a combination of, we changed jobs over the years and kind of have these orphaned 401ks that we haven't looked at in a decade. It might be just, accounts they've opened at Fidelity at some point, at Schwab at some point, at Vanguard or wherever else. And we stuck, 50 grand in there and, kind of made some investments and forgot about it. A lot of, in their case, it was really about just kind of simplification. Taking, I forget how many accounts. I mean, let's just say like a dozen accounts, and we were able to get that down to basically 5 because each spouse will have a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, and then you'll generally have like one trust account or a joint taxable account as well. So, just in their case, simplification, looking at the investments, saying there were some tax inefficient investments in there. So this is where I think FDS is unique because we all have different expertise, mine being investments, but we have Steve with tax. I can make a recommendation to say, you got to get out of these tax inefficient funds, but that might have its own tax consequence. So, Steve and I will work together very frequently to say, okay, we want to get them out of these funds because they do create this kind of tax drag year after year. But if we blow them all out at once, they're going to pay just a massive amount. So we might, as we're doing longer term tax projections or multi-year projections, we might just set a budget of we'll just sell down and realize gains of X amount. So that's what we did in their case as well, is we just had an opportunity to make some changes on a tax neutral basis and just things like that. And then on the insurance side, generally they were in very good shape, but as I mentioned earlier, their liability coverage really wasn't up to what they needed it to be. That's a really easy fix. And, just things like that. And I think you probably mentioned some things on the estate planning side as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, it's not uncommon for, executives to again have these large account balances. One of the great things is you have money, to be able to do the things you want to. The other thing is we really have to plan, what if something happens to one of you? Now all those assets become one person's instead of two people's. And so the estate tax, that estate tax calculation can become something we've got to pay attention to. So these are kind of the things in that planning we're watching for. For them, we needed to get some updated documents. So it was making sure that they had trusts in place to be able, again, one of the things when we're working with clients is we'll say, here's your net worth statement. That can be really helpful to an attorney to really realize the value of your net worth so that when they're planning for your estate plan, you can essentially just give that to them to say, here's the makeup of the type of assets that we have. That can really help attorneys to say, here's how many trusts, the types of trusts that you should have for, and to minimize that estate tax plan. So for them, this was something, when they're getting ready to retire, this wasn't necessarily at the stage that they needed to start taking action for estate tax planning savings, but as they retire and really as their assets continue to grow from these savings, they actually do, are going to need to start paying attention to this more. So these are some things kind of when we talk about this next stages for them and this all year, every year, these are things that we would mention to say, hey, this year, let's try and get that on the calendar with an estate planning attorney so that they can tell us, especially in a year like this year, we're waiting to see what, tax legislation is going to look like. That's income tax, but that's also estate tax. And so that's where this really affects people's plans. I think estate planning can just be one of those areas people forget about. And the estate tax that you could have if one of you passes away a lot sooner than, hoped or planned. And now, we need to look at that too. So those were some specific things for them that we needed to work on. So when we kind of talk about next steps for them, it was really, next steps kind of becoming this implementation, as we kind of take care of some of those first things. Now, how do we do this on an annual basis? And we've kind of talked about this, talk us through kind of next steps for them specifically, if there were things, that we needed to be paying attention to.
Yeah. I mean, to be very, very practical, in this example where there's some things they can be doing on the investment side to maybe be more diversified or more tax efficient. Because we are managing all the assets, I'm able to really get in there and just make sure that the allocation is good, that it lines up with their goals. And to the extent there are tax issues, as markets move up and down, there's always opportunities to maybe take some gains here at a lower level, something like that. So it's the ongoing is really important because, a lot of times it's people will get recommendations, and I'm not saying this is everyone, but a lot of times we see when we used to do a long time ago, we used to do one-time plans where we do the plan and then you never see them again. We'd have a number of cases where they come back 2 or 3 years later and, want to get an update, but they hadn't done anything from the first one. So, just making sure that the investments are getting there, making sure that from a tax standpoint, we're doing an annual tax analysis. So towards the end of the year, so that they know what their tax situation is going to look like. We don't do insurance, but we have contacts in insurance. If you need more life insurance, or in this case, they needed more umbrella, we have a resource to be able to go get that. A good policy at a good cost, things like that. So it's really that implementation. It is so important because, if you're going to pay a lot of money for a financial plan, but you're not 100% sure that you're going to actually do it, do you really want to spend that money? It is so much on our hearts that clients, not only get the answers, but they implement them, because these things, we've seen it over and over again with clients that we work with on an ongoing basis. They're implementing things, we're updating, we're making new recommendations. Those are getting implemented. You start getting like 3, 5, 7 years out, and you're like, holy cow, we've made a ton of progress, like way more than we thought when we first started working with you guys at FDS. And I mean, that's really what we're always trying to get at is that there's kind of this element of surprise, and no guarantees in life. That's my chief compliance officer hat. But there's no guarantees, but I mean, generally speaking, that is the experience we've seen is we work with you on an ongoing basis over a number of years. You get a lot farther than you thought when we did that initial plan all the way at the beginning. But the key was really around the implementation. So
Yeah. I think one of the exciting things every year is when, we'll have this list from an update the year before that says, here's the things to do this year. And when we've crossed those out because the clients have gotten those things done, it's so exciting, but it's also really reassuring because the things that they needed to do could have been, for example, get your estate planning documents updated. So in their case, getting these documents updated. Well, that isn't necessarily just a phone call to your insurance agent to increase your liability coverage. That's more of I need to find an attorney if I don't already have one, make sure that they know everything about me so they can give me the documents that I need. That's a very much can be a 2 to 3 month process, if that goes really smooth and quickly. And so some of these things are bigger things that we're actually, they're checking off their list. And so it's really encouraging when they're doing that, not only just to say, hey, we got this in place, but when something happens, how much better of an experience, that surviving spouse who needed to do everything, they already made those decisions together. So it's really just a matter of now implementing the plan they had in place. Those are the things that you're also allowing for yourself later in life that I think people don't necessarily remember or realize in the moment, or year by year as they're doing things. So.
Yeah. And even, for executives in particular, we might recommend, this is, an incremental but kind of tedious recommendation we make, like backdoor Roth contributions. And I won't get into the whole thing there, but when we're managing all your funds, say you have a taxable brokerage account and each spouse has a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA, we as your financial advisor, we'll check in with you obviously first, but we'll say, you know what, Nick and Noelle, we're recommending each of you contribute $7,000 each to your IRA and then convert that to a Roth. And we can handle that whole process. We can move that money from their trust to their traditional IRA and then convert it to Roth. Like, we do all that work for them. And, that is the kind of, when you're saving $30,000 a year, it's like another $7,000 is like, what does that really matter? But all these little things do matter. And to the extent that we can be doing all that, tedious or, work that a lot of people just wouldn't normally do on their own, we're able to do all that because we're working with you on an ongoing basis. The accounts are at Schwab, and we're able to kind of do stuff like that.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. I think one thing I'll just kind of wrap up with here is I really want to kind of give people a sense. So for example, with Nick and Noelle, just a kind of sense of the timeline, as we're moving through these different stages, I think it's helpful for people to know, this sounds like a lot of work. This sounds like it would take a long time. And so helping people understand really the time commitment here, but also, kind of what you end up with, as we move through kind of this, once a client decides they want to move forward forward, I will often tell them, we can move as quickly as you're able to or as you want to. And really that is true, because in that kind of data gathering step in the beginning, it's really, we're just waiting to get documents from you. Now, there's things that, we're happy to do. We always say, we could just jump on a Zoom call and just do all of that at once. And we actually just help you upload everything so that you don't actually have to do it yourself. We can help you do it. So that could go really quickly. Some people upload everything at once or over the weekend. And then others, it might take a few weeks because they maybe need to reach out to HR to get that. So that, that first step can really, that could be done in a week to 2 weeks. It could be done in days. It's really dependent on when we get information from you. From there, our team really kind of starts. We're building, that net worth, that mind map. And then we say, okay, we're starting to kind of formulate some strategy. We have that meeting with you. So that's, kind of a Zoom 45-minute meeting. We're reviewing everything. We go back and build the plan. So kind of over a course of 2 to 3 weeks where we say, our team's going to really work on this. Again, that can be anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. It really kind of depends. Again, timeline. Some people need to make decisions on some pieces before others, and we can work as quickly as we need to on those. So it's putting that plan together. So really, we kind of say like within 6 to 7 weeks, we can move through this entire timeline to now start implementing everything. Now, again, it can be quicker. It can take a lot longer. Some people will take, maybe several months, or maybe we send the list of here's the items to gather, but maybe it takes a month before we start getting everything. That just kind of gives you an idea of kind of the timeline, that it takes to kind of get started and be able to get your plan up and running and in place. While we're kind of building that plan, one of the pieces we like to do, because we work with clients who are managing the investments for them, is, once you send us those statements in the beginning, we're actually going to start moving those accounts to Schwab so that in the process, we're consolidating things for you so we can manage the investments and help implement once that plan is put together. And so there's kind of this timeline of, we want to make sure you have things to do while we have things to do, but we want to keep things moving forward so that you don't ever really feel like you're waiting on something, or that we've got a meeting scheduled and when that is. So that's kind of what just like that timeline looks like, the pieces and how they move, and kind of how they move back and forth between the two groups of people who have to do things to build your plan. This is helpful, I think, just for people to hear kind of okay, here was a client, here was some of their specifics, and now it really becomes, we're meeting with them each year, their plan, kind of give us maybe, as we're working with Nick and Noelle now, kind of this going forward, what does that look like in the future?
Yeah, so we do regular updates of their plan, so at least, once a year, once every other year, just depending on the client and what they want to do. We'll do a tax review each year. I send out regular commentary just about investments and the markets. I'm constantly looking at accounts and rebalancing and making changes here and there just to make sure they're well diversified and consistent with the recommendations that we're making. We'll review the insurance and estate on a regular basis every couple of years just to make sure all that's up to snuff. So, that's really... it just becomes, it's an easier process year after year because we kind of get into a rhythm with a client where we know what they're looking for. They know what we're going to ask them for. And so it's, the ongoing becomes a little bit easier. It's not nearly as intense as that initial, not that the initial is that intense, but it can feel that way sometimes. But yeah, so that's really a thing. And I think with executives in particular, one thing, this just occurred to me right now, as you're getting closer to retirement, the one thing I don't think anyone really thinks about until they have to make that decision is you're going to have a conversation with somebody at your company that you're going to retire. And, every company is different. And those conversations can either be very cordial and like, oh, I want to retire next year. That's great. Other companies are a little more difficult and you have to really play your cards close to the vest in terms of you don't want to announce too soon. Otherwise there's like this, this black mark over you. I remember with Noelle, we had an idea when she wanted to retire, but she didn't want to retire too early because, she didn't want her company to get skittish about anything, but at the same time, she didn't want to just announce it and then leave the next day because, she had invested years and years at this company, building the strategy, executing the strategy. And, for most executives, that strategy and everything you've done with that company, there's a personal relationship with that. And you don't want to just dump it off and leave. So, working through and planning through a transition if you're going to retire. So that's the one piece of this, I think, with executives that is different than a lot of other people that maybe aren't executives is there is kind of this ownership of your role and everything you've done with the company and wanting to leave the company on good terms. So, having that plan and really getting that plan in place, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, or even, start thinking about it 10 years before retirement, really doing that so that when that moment comes that you have to walk into your boss's office and say, I'm retiring, you're having that conversation confidently. You're in good shape, and presumably you've had, you've raised enough trial balloons that, hey, my retirement is coming up at some point, so it's not a huge surprise.
Yeah, I remember too, is, as you tell your employer, as you tell your boss, but now as she starts to tell her clients, like the projects that she's worked on and how will those be, and how are they responding? And so are there things now that they need to structure, based on this? And so it's those reactions depending on your role within your company and what you're doing and who you're working with inside and outside of your company. So yeah, those are very touchy, but you want to be very confident in those decisions. So now it's just a matter of, okay, how do we do this well? How do we make this transition well?
Yep. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you. And we can both report that Nick and Noelle are traveling. They are seeing the sights. So whether that's an art trip where they're experiencing a country they love and drawing and, just doing all those things in that culture, or if it's a family trip, it's really fun for us to be able to hear that because that's what we want for them. That was a goal. They wanted to travel. They wanted to be doing those things, or just here with grandkids. That was really huge for them. So it's exciting when we can hear that that's actually happening because their plan is still on track. So, well, thank you for joining me, Rob. This has been really helpful.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, we're looking forward to the next few episodes where we kind of dig in a little bit more on these things.
Yes. And thank you all for listening. In our next episode, we will have another planning session where we discuss a couple who is planning out their retirement and they realize they need to switch some of their goals so they can move closer to family and take care of aging parents. So stay tuned. If you are someone who is starting to think about retirement but isn't quite sure what you're missing, that's where a team like ours can help you. We take care of your finances so that you can confidently enjoy your life knowing you're on track. So schedule a free consultation on our website. But until then, we'll talk to you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening. To find any links or resources related to this episode, check out our show notes. Your host was Michelle Smallenberger, a certified financial planner and CEO. The guests featured are from Financial Design Studio, a team of experienced, fiduciary, fee-only advisors based in Chicago. Anna Lewis is the executive producer of the Behind the Designs podcast. And as always, for more information about Financial Design Studio and who we are, check out our website, financialdesignstudio.com. And final note, no content discussed on this podcast should be taken as financial advice. Financial Design Studio accepts no responsibility for your individual choices. We'll see you in the next episode.